You're listening to the Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
This snow we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that storm
The National Weather Service is until and issued a tornado warning for northwestern Maine.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good Thursday evening. We are joining you live tonight. I'm Tyler Jankowski, joining the show from Connecticut, Bristol, Connecticut to be specific. And I'm joined alongside, as always, by my counterpart, Dakota Smith. Dakota.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Yes, as always, I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado. And getting into the weather, finally my weather is interesting. So I guess it was yesterday morning, Tuesday night, we had a snowstorm move through, drop a quick 12 inches in Fort Collins and upwards of 20 inches down near Boulder and Denver. The most interesting part about this, these storms are normal for this time of the year here. March is our snowiest month. But the most interesting part is that 12 hours before the storm happened, generally there was a 1 to 2 inch forecast for Denver to Fort Collins, and even 6 hours before precip was starting, it was like 4 to 6 inches. So it was a terrible forecast, worst forecast I think I've ever seen in terms of a winter storm, so especially for such a densely populated area. There's a lot of people that live in Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, and so I could talk about this forever, and I think we're going to have a show on it in the near future. But that's what I'm experiencing. Now it's nice outside, 40s, a little bit of snow on the ground. It'll be gone within a day or two. Tyler, how's the weather up in your neck of the woods?
Well, early in the week on Monday, we had a glancing blow from a coastal storm. If you were following the storm, you know what a mess it was in terms of forecasting it. We had people canceling the storm and then uncanceling the storm, and ultimately, the storm did hit. It wasn't a blockbuster, but got a couple of inches here, really statewide across Connecticut. And I was somewhat out of the loop over the weekend. I was in State College with you, but I do know that, for many days, the American modeling had a clean miss or either a glancing blow, while the European model had a major hit, run after run after run. I don't even know if there was a clear winner after the storm, because right before the storm, the American models had almost nothing. We ended up with 3 or 4 inches. The Euro kind of came around to that. So all around, it was just a horrendous forecast. Hopefully, the last snow of the season. I'm just sick of forecasting that type of storm where you just couldn't even get a grip on it until it started to happen. So that was Monday. Nice amount of. It was good flakes, but it was also sticky because the temperatures were close to freezing, so it stuck to a lot of things. After that, the snow all melted within a day. As you said, will probably occur in Colorado, so a similar story in that regard. And we have rain on the way tomorrow, but the Easter weekend looks delightful with a lot of sun and temperatures at or above seasonable levels, so approaching 60 by Easter Sunday. Another rainstorm comes in on Monday. So it's still a very stormy pattern with these big areas of low pressure, but I don't know, maybe we're done with the snow.
So we got what's going on in Colorado, in the Northeast, and we're joined by our special guest tonight, Tom Bedard, who's currently in North Carolina. Tom, how's the weather where you're at?
It's overcast. Current temperature is 75 degrees. A light drizzle is falling through the air for a beautiful sunset.
Wow.
And by beautiful sunset, I mean it's a lovely shade of gray here. And I've got advice for you guys. If you don't like forecasting for snowstorms, move to Hawaii. We have the same weather every single day of the year. It is mountain showers and sun by the beach.
I love forecasting for snowstorms, but it seems like everyone this year has thrown us for a loop until 3 hours into the storm. So it's been exhausting. And we haven't netted a lot of snow out of all of this work.
Tom, that's funny. I know It's like Southern California kind of, nice every day. Kind of, I don't know, if you're a forecaster, I feel like you would hate that.
I've only heard miserable tales of what it's like to do shift work in 12 hours, out 12 hours, forecasting nothing but high of 75, low of 65.
Yeah. So our special guest is Tom Bedard. Just to give a brief intro, his current title is a Course Development Program Coordinator at the National Disaster Preparedness Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. He graduated from Penn State with a degree in meteorology. And interestingly, he's a trained emergency medical technician. So Tom, I was just curious, what's I know we have your title, but what's kind of some of the work that you do at the Preparedness Center?
The title is brand new. It's barely a week old. It still has that fresh new car smell to it. The previous one was Weather and Climate Program Specialist. So I worked with Mr. Owen Shea, or soon to be Dr. Owen Shea, at the NDPTC. And he and I designed training classes for first responders and emergency managers. Not the typical CPR first aid, but we would design training classes to teach science to people that would be typical emergency and disaster responders, which is a great opportunity to enter into a classroom where everybody has a story about weather. We've taught in Norman, Oklahoma, Buffalo, New York. This week we're teaching in Cherokee, North Carolina. And it's great to be able to hear their stories, teach them a little bit about the science, and then participate in an activity before the end of the class where we simulate a live disaster. So that's in and out what the work at NDPTC is. What we do is train first responders and emergency managers to help respond to natural hazards. And ideally, we prepare them with enough education and training that the disaster never even happens, and that they're so ready for that tornado to come that nothing occurs. They evacuate everybody. There's no fatalities, no injuries. So that's our goal, as lofty as it is. We're nothing but a couple of scientists that really like to hear ourselves talk and like to travel a lot.
All right, so we've kind of dipped our toes in the water. The water is warm and perfect. It sounds like a fascinating topic. We want to hold that thought until the main part of the show. First, we want to get to our Trending in the Weather Twitterverse segment. The whole goal of introducing our primary guest right at the top of the show is to get everyone interested and excited about what we're going to talk about. But our first tweet of the night is a tweet that Dakota selected, and it is all about the Denver forecast bust.
Yeah, so this tweet is from Jeff Schwartz. You can follow him at Schwartz Now. Tweet goes, models, art versus science, should be a great research paper. And he's talking all about the blizzard that we had out here. And it will be a great research paper. I don't think many people know actually what happened in the models that gave them such a terrible low-pressure position. That was the case out here. The low was forecast to be much further north and east. Instead, it was south and west. And along the Front Range, all it takes is a shift in wind direction to produce snow or to have a completely dry wind. Go ahead, Tyler.
In simple terms, how much snow is forecast and how much occurred in one town?
Outside of Boulder and Denver, 12 hours before the precip started, the forecast was 1 to 2 inches, and they got upwards of 20 inches.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So talk about a nightmare. But
that is a populated area?
A very heavily populated area.
If you had to pick one Northeast city, what would you say it's most similar to?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know. The outskirts of Denver are very populated. Denver itself isn't nearly as populated as some of the East Coast cities, but the suburbs stretching from Denver to Boulder is probably the most populated area in Colorado. And so I tweeted this out earlier today. I said on the East Coast, this would be a major outcry, major fallout. In Colorado, it's just like, weather happens.
Yeah.
No big deal. And I think maybe that's why we're not, I don't know, I could speculate about why we're not improving these forecasts, because it's definitely harder to forecast out here than it is on the East Coast.
So you're saying maybe 100 to 200,000 people in one of these metro areas?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
So that would be a Worcester, Massachusetts, a Springfield, Massachusetts, a Hartford, Connecticut. I mean, this I think that helps people understand. I think a lot of our listeners are from the eastern part of the country, and that would be crazy. I mean, we've kind of had it happen in reverse when you look back to the blizzard that wasn't last January, but I can't even imagine what would happen if we forecast 1 inch and got 20. Probably blizzard of 78 outcomes. The blizzard of 78, I don't know if you know, was well forecast, but at that time of weather forecasting, no one believed what was in the forecast, so everyone ignored it. But,
yes. So it'll be interesting, and I'm gonna want to talk about it later on another show.
Were people stranded on the highways?
I saw a few reports. It didn't seem too widespread, but luckily it happened overnight. So in the morning, people could everything was closed. So it would have been much worse if it happened during the day, and people could have been stuck at work easily. So a lot to dive in there. Hopefully we can talk about it on another show. On to our next tweet. It's from Jay Farlow. It says, how to stay safe from weather danger at outdoors events like festivals, sports, etc. And he made a nice video he interviewed a National Weather Service forecaster, and it was talking about how to stay informed during an outdoor event and how to make sure that you don't get caught in the track of some nasty weather that could do some damage to you. Tom, I'm sure you deal with some of these situations in terms of training people, and you probably didn't watch the video, but what do you think about the main take from the video is having the information yourself? It was kind of less of the event actually planning for their audience. How do you feel about that?
I like when people go to events and they understand exactly what the risks are when they go to them. So when I worked with AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions, it was a very short stint, but a great stint with a great company. We worked with a lot of clients that were on the management side of those big venues, those large events and large venues. And it was important for them to be able to convey the risk that they had down to their patrons. But if you're talking about it from the patron side, if people understand how far they are away from their car, how close they are to a shelter, and taking a look at the shelter and trying to eyeball how much wind that can stand up to, that would make people a lot safer at these events. Knowing the weather forecast is great, but you also have to know that if that forecast goes wrong, where can you go?
We will elaborate much more on this idea in our main segment, but we want to move on to our next tweet, tweet number 3, and that is from RadarScope. RadarScope 3.0 released earlier this week for iOS and Android. I have RadarScope. Dakota, I know you have RadarScope. Tom, do you have RadarScope?
I absolutely do, and I use it every single day.
I think everyone would agree that this is the best app out there for displaying radar data on not just mobile phones, but also a Mac. If you have a Mac, they have a Mac app that will be updated hopefully in the coming months. But all the dual pole products, or a lot of the dual pole products that matter, and dual pane mode, all included. I looked in this thread here that RadarScope tweeted, and one of the interesting things that caught my eye was someone was asking, why are you having a subscription-based system? Why do you charge? My first thought when I bought RadarScope, and by the way, I've only bought in one app ever, I believe, and it was RadarScope for $10. It's absolutely worth it. And my question that I would ask everyone is, how are they going to survive if they only charge $10 once? Everyone's going to buy it, and pretty much it's a limited amount of people that are going to buy it. It's going to be one big surge and then just trickling. And so they came up with this subscription program, and they responded to this person saying, with the dual pane view, in other words, where you could view, say, reflectivity and velocity, that doubles the load on their servers. It doubles the bandwidth. That kind of blew my mind. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but they are really dumping a lot of resources into this. Not to mention the lightning feed and the super resolution feed, and it's hard to get super resolution data for free. I know Allison House sells it, and there's an Iowa State feed, but it's not always reliable. But the data offering in this app is superior to everything else. So if you don't have RadarScope and you're listening, even if you are not a meteorologist, I would highly recommend it. it is the app that shows you all the radar that you need.
Do you have a favorite thing about the upgrade?
Definitely the dual pane. I would always put pictures together and pick stitch like correlation coefficient and reflectivity, and it would take about 2 or 3 minutes. So if there was a debris signature on radar, it was just slow.
Gotcha.
So this is amazing that you can do dual pane. You can also inspect, and when you inspect, it inspects the same pixel on both panes. And if you know anything about picking out a debris signature, you really want to get the values below or above a certain number. And when it's inspecting the same position on different products, you get a reading. For example, reflectivity over 35 dBz, correlation coefficient much lower than 0.9. You know, there are things that you want to be co-located if you're looking for debris. So it's the preeminent app for radar, and don't have enough good things to say about it. Every company should strive to sell something that is of the quality of RadarScope. I personally think it's a little cheap, but I don't want that to change, obviously. And that takes us into our final tweet from Scott Workema, and he is a meteorological support specialist at WDT, that is Weather Decision Tech. They are the makers of RadarScope nowadays. And it was a post. I thought it was a very Apple-like post, an Apple-esque post, in that they give their reasoning for not allowing custom color tables in RadarScope. And you have to understand that RadarScope is used by the vast majority of meteorologists and weather enthusiasts across the country. So similar to Apple, they have a lock on what's going on. They control almost everything. So when they come out and say that they're not going to offer custom color tables, at least right now, that is a big story. And their reasoning was they feel that they have a social responsibility to be very consistent, not only for the people that purchase the app, but for the second end users, if you will, the people that are viewing these radar images, people like Joe and Sally in Tyrone, or Ethel in East Hartford. And they provide an example of all these different color tables. Honestly, they did a good job of making the other ones look terrible. But they want to make the data as easy to understand as possible, and they know that so many people use this app, they can actually have an influence in that department. I did see someone say, well, what about the colorblind people? I don't know what it's like to be colorblind, but I believe they said they would address that. So it's good to see that even though they've come out with a stance, they are not setting everything in concrete, and they're not ignoring what people are saying.
Yeah, I really like the consistency of it. I think it's important to have data presented in a consistent manner, because especially across different products, sometimes you get confused if you think one color contour means something different, like on a different product. So I like the reasoning, and I thought it was a really nice write-up.
I would say if the color tables sucked, I would have a problem with it, but I love the color tables. I think they do a nice job. I don't really have any complaints.
Yeah.
But for those that are colorblind or have issues with the way they are currently displaying things, hopefully they can come up with some kind of remedy for that in the future. I'm not sure how they would do that, though.
Yeah. So let's dive into our main topic this evening, and that's weather disaster preparedness, and we're joined by our good friend Tom Bedard. And Tom, just kind of off the bat, you have a very interesting background as an EMT, or you were an EMT at least in college. And how does that background form how you view an extreme weather event, and how does it kind of form your passion for meteorology? Because I'm sure when you're looking at a big weather system, you're like, oh man, how's this going to affect these people this way, and they're going to need responders on the ground. What's your take on that?
It forms it much the way it forms a lot of people's passion for football. When you see a hazardous weather event like a springtime severe weather event, a tornado outbreak starting to form up, you get the opportunity to start working with a lot of different people, a lot of different first responders, emergency managers, hospital managers, and volunteer agencies to set up a plan before the event happens. And even as the day approaches, days, hours, minutes, you get to watch the weather plan and tweak your strategy a little bit until the hazard actually appears. And then it becomes this beautiful mess of making sure all of your assets are organized around the storm so that nothing is being hit. All of your fire apparatus, all of your medical trucks are well out of the way of the storm. So we're reorganizing, we're running plays, and we're talking with our teammates just as much as we are in football. So it becomes a game of strategy that you're playing against the atmosphere. It always feels sometimes like you're playing a losing battle until you're able to beat it and beat a disaster. And that's essentially why the first response aspect of it is so interesting to me.
So before we delve deeper into this, let's start out, say, a decade ago. I've always thought that you have a unique take on things, perhaps a unique set of interests that are all melded together. Take us through how you set on this path, probably starting in high school, perhaps early Penn State. How did you go down this unique path? What are your inspirations, and what is your true passion, even though I think I might know the answer?
Well, it was started in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains at the tender age of 12 when I was raised by wolves to learn and understand that I can't go on that tangent. My interest in disasters has been through seeing them all. In New York City, I got to see classic extreme snow events. When I was in Texas, I got to see the response to Katrina and then what Houston responded to with Rita. Over in the Pacific Northwest, when I lived in Portland, I would see these incredible windstorms. And the common theme and the common thread between every event that I got to see was that people were somehow still lacking the information they needed. And it wasn't in the broadcast format. It was that they would get everything they needed from the weather service or their private company or the TV, but they wouldn't know how to understand it, how to operationalize the science that we had. So when I was in high school, I didn't do anything particularly special, but when I came to college, I got really involved with emergency medical services, really involved in working with a stressful environment inside of home delivery pizza pub in State College, and learned that I dealt very well with stressful situations. I have to say, if you give somebody 2 top cheeseburger buns for their cheeseburger, they will be more upset with you than any other person in a medical emergency that I've ever seen. I've been called so many bad names there, but not in the EMS setting. So I joke about that, but I love the stressful situations that I got to experience and seeing disasters from the civilian standpoint of seeing that we need to provide communication and information in a stronger and more efficient manner.
I remember vividly how much of a supporter, how fervent you were about the emergency medical service at Penn State, and I always looked up to you, and very proud of how far you've come.
Well, this is a tender moment for me, Tyler.
But before I let Dakota take the next question, I just want to,
We're just joking.
for someone who may know very little about this topic, and I think a lot of people know what FEMA is, and they hear about FEMA in the news. You work at the National Disaster Preparedness Center, so talk a little bit about the funding for that center and what makes it unique from FEMA, and how does it find its place, and how did it develop?
I often find myself trying not to question too many things about where we get our money because I love doing the job so much that I don't want to figure out where it comes from. But our grant comes from the Federal Emergency Management Agency through the Department of Homeland Security. It's routed through the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, which is a group of universities, private sector partners, and centers that train first responders and emergency managers. So across our board, we can train an EMT to respond to a tornado, to respond to an active shooter, to respond to Ebola, smallpox, anthrax. Our member just handles natural hazards. So National Disaster Preparedness Training Center receives a small sub-grant inside of that larger National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, and we develop all of the natural hazard classes for our group of partners.
So I'm glad we have a basis now for kind of what you do and where you work.
I'm that shady guy that travels around a lot and posts a lot on Snapchat.
Yeah, I can attest to the Snapchat part. I was looking forward to your growing up with wolves story, if I'm being honest.
I'm sorry, I'll give it to you on another broadcast, I promise. If you guys really start having a hard time finding speakers, I'll come back with that. It's a great story.
Okay, good. So getting into disaster preparedness, and you mentioned that people had the data. They had the data that they needed, but they didn't know how to interpret it. Hence, they didn't have the information necessary to take action.
Right.
Where have we come in terms of that, and where do we need to go?
We've come to the point where people know what routes that they will trust their information coming from. We operate under the rule of threes in many cases, which is that a person needs to see the same information in 3 separate spots to be able to trust that. We haven't changed very far in how scientifically educated the general population is, but we've gotten to the point where our National Weather Service partners, our TV news media partners, and those within first response are all saying the same message. So previously, we might have been saying 3 separate messages, one about a tornado watch, one about a warning, one about timing. Now we've gotten it away inside of these integrated warning teams where everybody's saying the same thing. So even if Joe and Sally are operating that they need to see the same message 3 times over, we can ensure that that same message is broadcasted because all of our partners are working together now. So we have gotten significantly better as the years have gone on.
So you're saying that there's pretty good communication between the forecaster and the broadcaster. Is that?
I would hope so. Usually,
Yeah.
you know, all the news stations I've seen have great relationships with the local weather forecast offices.
Gotcha. So in kind of your experience, we got the forecaster-broadcaster part down, but what about the communication between them and emergency management? Because I think it goes both ways, right? They need information from their forecasters, but the emergency management people can also, I don't know, help relay messages to the broadcaster so that more, bad things don't happen during this event. What's that kind of relationship like between the emergency management side of that?
That relationship is getting better. A lot of first responders and emergency managers are becoming trained as National Weather Service Skywarn spotters, and they're relaying back damage reports that they find, and those are called local storm reports, or LSRs, that you guys are both familiar with. Those LSRs are usable for the media, who can take that in as either a free product into a GIS field, or even see them on Twitter posts. So that allows the media to be able to identify that there is a downed tree on this road, or that highway, I-80, is covered over in ice right now. So the advent of social media and the advent of having more first responders take Skywarn is allowing for us to get better data, and when we have better data, we have better decisions made.
Oh, you mentioned social media. Is that being well utilized by emergency management?
I would say it is. We have, NDPTC has one of the, actually if not, we do have the most successful social media class that we deliver to thousands of people every year across the U.S. And inside of that class, we teach them how to use hashtags, how to properly use Twitter, use Facebook. I know, this is something I never thought I'd talk about, like a hardened fire chief saying hashtag PA weather,
That's
or
awesome,
hashtag
though.
cats, something. But it's incredible because they're learning how to use it, they're getting into analytics, they're getting into crowdsourcing, and you're finding that it's making the response a lot easier.
So your job takes you all around the country to see so many different people, all these different states, hundreds of miles. What is the most common improvement that must be made?
The most common improvement that must be made, I should say that the best improvement, though it's the terribly unrealistic one, is to fund the National Weather Service and fund local emergency management better, so that they have the time that they can dedicate to training to better understand all of this.
Money.
Money would be the easiest one, right? The most easily accomplished one across the United States would be to have, man, that's a tough question. I'm trying to kill time with this one.
Well, so Tyler mentioned that you go to all these different places and different regions. Is there a difference in how you have to teach things and certain things you have to teach depending on where you are?
Yeah, so we teach a variety of different classes, so depending on what class we're teaching, we tailor to the hazard. But today we talked a bit about tornadoes, and one of the potential instructors that did his interview of sorts today is a hospital emergency manager from Norman, Oklahoma. So he was talking about tornadoes. More importantly, he was talking about the Moore, Oklahoma tornado hitting his hospital. So the perspective that we got from him was a completely different side. So we were teaching an academic campuses class for emergency management. And then he brought into the hospital portion. We started talking about how tornadoes impact North Carolina, and he offered some lessons learned that they had from Oklahoma. So we have to tailor to what kind of weather hazard hits the region, but oftentimes we try to teach outside of what the region would typically consider to get them thinking outside of the box.
So what kind of results have you seen from all this teaching, whether it's quantitative or qualitative?
The quantitative results have been, on average, a 15 to 20% increase in what we call enabling learning objectives, and those are as simple as defining a tornado or understanding a National Weather Service watch or warning. And that percentage isn't terribly big, but what it shows is that we're going into a classroom, whatever classroom that is, and leaving with those participants having a stronger understanding of weather. So that's the quantitative. The numbers are showing that we're giving a very strong impact. Qualitatively, we're starting to spark people caring about understanding the science. And you would think perhaps at first glance that it wouldn't be terribly important for somebody outside of our field to understand it. But in the case of Hurricane Sandy, to have had first responders and emergency managers understand that that storm was asymmetric, even as a hurricane before it transitioned, that all of the hazards were focused on the western part of it, then we would have had an improved response to that, an improved preparation. So what we're seeing as the common thread between all of these and the qualitative improvement is that people are starting to care about science, and that is so cool to see that spark come alive in somebody's eyes after they've had strings of science teachers and math teachers ruin the art, ruin the science for them. We're starting to bring it back.
How do you do that? Like how are you bringing the life into that? Because I feel like your normal science teacher can't do that. Do you have a trick, or is it just your passion, or what is it?
I think a normal science teacher can. We're just getting these people at a point in time where they realize that they need to understand this better. And to be honest, our strategy is we hire really good instructors. We hire really, really big weather weenies. We put them in front of a group of fire chiefs and tell them to nerd out. They understand the audience, so they're able to teach appropriately. We use adult education theory, but we hire the best weather nerds we can find, put them in front of a classroom, and their passion ignites the passion of others.
So a heavy part of what you do is weather driven, even though you factor in preparedness and in ways to handle disasters. There's a lot of weather. That's the sense I'm getting.
It is.
What would you say is the most common complaint or thing that people say as it relates to weather or the National Weather Service or something of that nature?
Well, the most common complaint is always going to be the same, that we get to be wrong 90% of the time and still hold our jobs. They love that one. We find a lot of frustration in the changing definitions of National Weather Service warning criteria, specifically for winter storms. So you guys saw that they changed that for at least the eastern region for the National Weather Service did change their criteria this year. There's a lot of emergency operations plans that are built to trigger off of those warnings. And when those warning criteria change without good communication, that causes a lot of stress on the end of the first responder. So that has been one of the points of difficulty, to have them have a good understanding of our warning systems, though they understand that the National Weather Service is taking in current research, taking in current social science, and they're changing it for a good reason. They're just frustrated that the system itself sometimes is not the easiest to work with.
That's exactly what I was getting at, because I assume what Dakota was going to say. We actually talked about this on a previous episode, the complexity of our warning system.
Yeah, and the HAZSIMP is hazardous simplification is, as you probably know, Tom. What's your take on that? Actually, are we gonna simplify our watches, warnings, and advisories in a way that is more understandable, or what do we need to do there?
So I have a bit of inside knowledge about the HAZSIMP conference that I've been told I'm not allowed to share yet, But what I can say
Oh,
is,
come on.
I know. Owen made me promise upon the pain of death that I not tell him anything.
Okay.
The thing that I can say about the HazSimp project is that at least they're taking in social science data to be able to understand how we really need to be listening to warnings. So the simplification aspect does look good. It's just going to be the art of changing so many traditional ways of thinking for our warning systems that may become challenging. Working with different demographics who may be aging at that point, who would say that, no, this is the definition of what we understand a tornado warning to be, and it's not any different. If HazSimp is actually going to be successful, then it needs to have an extremely strong outreach plan, stronger than the Weather Service has ever implemented before.
So we talked about hazard simplification, we've talked about common complaints, frustrations, biggest need for improvement. Do you find that there are major differences as you traverse the country? Is there something that's unique to the Northeast or the Southeast or California? Any things that you notice that really have to do with the region you're in?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the way that different regions understand and respond to weather. Those in New England that I've had the chance to work with have been the most weather savvy and weather hardened. The strongest relationship with local weather warning coordination meteorologists has been across the southern U.S. And Texas and Oklahoma, obviously, though that's kind of traversing outside of the South. But in, where were we for AMS? We were in New Orleans. New Orleans has one of the strongest weather service relationships with local emergency management that I've seen. So if I were to regionalize it, the Northeast has the best handle on the science. The Southern Plains has the best handle on the National Weather Service relationship. And the Western Plains has the strongest understanding of how to plan for these events well in advance. The hazard mitigation plan for, I believe it's Wyoming, that I had the chance to read last year, was telling us about these grand extreme events that had occurred in the past, and one that had killed, I think, 100,000 head of cattle that wasn't more than 30 years ago. So they have a great understanding for the economic impact that storms have. But Tyler, that's a fantastic question to ask, how each region's different. I had to think about that for a moment.
So I'm going to change path a little bit. In terms of the public being prepared for a disaster, what do you think is, I don't know, a few things that people need to know now or have now that they don't have? My guess for that would be a plan, but I'll let you answer it.
I'd like to just be able to say, have a go, kid, get a plan, but the common preparedness paradigms really get on my nerves. It's almost like watching a Disney show over and over again. For the average person out there, if you understand what weather hazards are common for your area, knowing how to take shelter, knowing what it would take for that particular weather hazard to become a disaster for you, I think is what a lot of people should consider. So you think about tornadoes being that one thing that people have on their mind, and that's great because you'll shelter no matter what from that. But understanding in the future how much rain you have to see in the forecast for you to pull your kid out of school ahead of time, or how much wind you would see in the forecast to know that that mobile home that you live in will fall over. Understanding your individual risk will help you mitigate the need to do this grand preparedness. You always should. But people should understand the need that they have themselves and make sure that they're not relying on first responders and emergency managers to bail them out of situations that they could have prepared for themselves.
So you're in North Carolina right now, correct?
I think so. My jet lag just turned off, which is a shame because now I'm about to shoot 6 hours back in time.
What time is it for you right now?
Hawaiian time?
Yeah.
What time is it?
It's 2:39 in Hawaii. I looked it up before the show.
Oh, wow.
Oh. I was going to ask you what time it was in Connecticut and do the math, but I like that.
It'd be the same as North Carolina. Give us an idea of your typical week. When does it start? When does it end? How much travel?
My typical week will start at about 7 a.m. on Monday and end at about 11 p.m. on Friday.
Ooh.
I work some terrifically late nights because we don't have a lot of staff. We make...
Do we still have Tom?
I think we might have lost him. I guess he didn't want to get into his job that much. Well, I don't. He might come back, but if he didn't, I think that was awesome. I thought there was a lot of insight on weather disaster preparedness and some of the things that he has to deal with as someone who's teaching scientists and emergency managers and other people. Tyler, any last thoughts here? I don't. Doesn't look like we're gonna get Tom back, but.
I am sending him a message, but no, I thought it was fascinating. I think a lot of times we have meteorologists on the show, we have weather people, we have people that put a lot of effort into studying the weather, but there's so many other areas of the field and so many other things that meteorologists go out and do, and Tom is an example of that. And so it was really nice to hear from him and from the preparedness perspective.
Yeah, just kind of a last note. I thought it was interesting. He said when they change warning criteria, it causes them quite a deal of headache because they have to change to what they're responding to.
Yeah, even though that's not a good thing, I was kind of glad he brought it up because we had talked about it before, and he's on the front line. So if there's anyone to hear from, it would be him probably.
I wish he could have given us that nugget about the has simp.
Well, maybe we'll have him on in a couple of weeks or months. I don't know how long it'll take.
Yeah, it sounded like a juicy detail. But that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you don't follow us already, you can find us on Twitter at the WX Junkies. We're on Facebook. You can listen to this on SoundCloud, YouTube, or iTunes. And if you're on iTunes, give us a rating, whether it's good or bad. Doesn't matter. Just give us a rating. And next week will be Thursday evening again. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.
Actually, do we have Tom? Looks like his microphone is muted, but I think we have connected with Tom again.
Oh, you have. Sorry, I muted myself and I disconnected myself.
So,
I think you guys just closed out. So thank you guys so much for inviting me to talk on this. It was great catching up, and I really enjoyed speaking with you both about something I'm really passionate about.
And we want to get in our question that we ask everyone that comes on the show. Dakota, take it away.
All right, last question, Tom. What, throughout your career, what has been the most important skills or skill that you've had in your career?
The most important skill that I've learned in my career?
Yeah, like something that you commonly use, or it doesn't have to be, hands-on skill, but maybe kind of an overarching. A lot of people say passion. A lot of people say other things. Anything come to mind?
This is an incredibly easy one, and one that I'll suggest for every young 20-something out in the career force. The most important thing that I've learned is how to sit down and listen. How to listen to the expertise of those above us, because as the millennial generation, it's something that we don't do and we get a rap for not doing. So in my early career, so far I've learned, if I can't think to do anything else, I'll just listen to what everybody else around me is saying. And if there's nothing to contribute, then nothing to contribute. But that's been the most important lesson I've learned.
Well, you're in good company, Tom, because Rear Admiral David Titley said the exact same thing.
Did he really? I didn't even listen to him, so I'll have to tell him that when I see him next.
Yeah, so you're in great company. And on that note, thanks, Tom, for joining us, and thanks, everyone, for listening. And for Tom, Tyler, and myself, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.